Committee. I want to thank all of you for joining us here this morning. For many of you might have sort of stepped right over from the previous meeting on state finances with Jim Regenball, so you have plenty of numbers swirling in your head, so there's no need to slow up now. We might as well keep going. We're going to hear from Senator Hanger, and then we're going to hear from Delegate Ware. We'll hear from both of those folks for about 15 minutes each, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And I'm sure many of you have some interesting questions for our two members from the General Assembly. Let me introduce Senator Hanger by saying he's been representing the 24th Senatorial District since 1996, including parts of Culpeper, all of Madison County, Rockbridge, Augusta, Greene, the city of Stanton, Waynesboro. He's co-chair of Senate Finance Committee, chair of Health and Human Services Subcommittee, and I know he tends to get quoted in the paper a lot and the news a lot, so you apparently do sell some media sources every once in a while. If you would, give me a big welcome this morning to Senator Hanger.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Certainly good to be with you here. I always enjoy, and for now a few years, I guess I have, except when I've had a couple of conflicts, been here with you at your conference here at the Homestead, and I always find it a very meaningful experience. More so not what I'm doing right now, because, you know, I'll just say some things and y'all will ask some questions, but we'll back and forth, which is good. But just being able to network with all of you from all around the state is very helpful to me in terms of getting some significant input and renewing friendships and making new friends. So that's always good. I had the opportunity yesterday with the steering committee with finance to speak to some of you who were present then, so I'll try to avoid being repetitive, but I would like to just go over a quick outline of thoughts relative to where we are at this point in time with the finances of the state, and some of the pressures that we're going to see from the budget standpoint, and some other issues, particularly as they relate to our relationship between state and local government. First, revenues. You know, we're all kind of in shell shock from the elections this past week, but you know, the good news for us in the Commonwealth right now is that we have been slowly but steadily regaining our footing as far as our revenue sources. We are used to kind of leading the pack, being, you know, with average 5% of economic growth, solid, one of the leaders in the nation as far as employment and all of those things. In fact, you heard a little bit of that during the campaign, but there are reasons that you all are very much aware of on the ground, while some of our performance has been lagging over the last several years. Most notably, our relationship with the federal government. And that's still the uneasy point right now, where people just have not figured out and are a little bit concerned about the direction of our federal government and the leadership at this point in time. As far as Virginia is concerned, as you recall, last year we had to tighten our belt, as many of you all had to do the very same thing. You tighten your belt, a combination of tightening your belt and adjusting your real estate tax rate. Many of you had to do that. Any of y'all have to raise your real estate tax last year? A few of you? Just something we don't typically do at the state level. We say, you know, we kind of push back on y'all. Y'all noticed that before, I expect. But you know, we were anticipating growth in the range, I think, of about 3.4, 3.7%, and it came in lower than that. So we had to reduce our expectations for this fiscal year to 2.7%. The good news, of course, is that through September, rather through October, through September, we were tracking ahead. In fact, we had a good month in September where our revenue growth was 5.5%, and even better month in October, which hasn't been publicly released yet. It will be later this week, but our general fund revenue grew 7.7%, and which gives us an average year to date of about 4.5%, somewhere in that range, which is excellent, because we will hopefully finish out the fiscal year. We can keep on track with those revenue projections for a while, that we will have some surplus hopefully at the end of fiscal 2018 to carry into a new budget that we'll be working on in this session of the General Assembly. Still, the uncertainty with the federal level is the drag on our revenues and on affecting our ability to plan ahead with certainty. We see the possibility for sequestration being notable there. 70% of our general fund revenue, which is about $20 billion per year, just a round number, comes from withholding tax. That's roughly 70%. The other big contributor is the sales tax. Virginia withholding was not growing for some reason. We were increasing our employment, and what had, of course, been discovered, we were replacing high-paying jobs with lower-paying jobs, and we had to adjust to that. We're getting more, and now we're seeing some growth in the wage rates. And I passed around a sheet yesterday, which will be fun for some of you and depressing for others, but I'm going to pass it around again today. A staff person put this together for me last week, which shows essentially where the income tax is coming from in the Commonwealth and how much is coming from that area. And it may not be a surprise, but it was a surprise to me that the number was as big as it is. But I mentioned that 70% of our general fund comes from withholding. Well, over 50% of that 70% comes from, where would you think? Now, our good friend, or someone who I've known in the past, at least his dad, and I'm still scratching my head about him, Jerry Falwell, said that we'd be better off if we let Washington, D.C. annex Northern Virginia. I don't think so. Let me pass this around. If y'all just quickly take a look at it, it's just interesting. It shows all of the Commonwealth and the per capita revenue that we're capturing from withholding, and then the cumulative impact. Of course, the numbers are skewed because even though that area is little up there in Northern Virginia that we're including there, a lot of people live up there, and then you'll hear are from that part. Now, where were we going? We are, of course, getting ready to prepare to go into session, prepare our new biennial budget, with the new administration coming in, and a lot of new people. And of course, you know, there were some surprises in local government elections this past year. And we're all still shaking our heads and wondering about what happened last Tuesday. Some people are really glad about it, some people are a little upset about it, but the bottom line is the Senate, of course, we're not having elections this year, we will have our same cast and the same dynamic with the 21-19 split, and still a Democrat presiding over the Senate. So we're pretty much the same scenario that we've had. The House is going to be a bit uncertain. Not that there won't be good people over there, but I don't think the relative numbers, 51, 50-50, or 51-49, will be as significant as the fact that there's just going to be a whole lot of new people over there that need to get acclimated to the system as they seek to represent their area. And some of them will have divergent interests in terms of what they think is appropriate in terms of where they want to see the Commonwealth go. The big ticket items, as we've looked into preparing numbers, and our Senate Finance Committee will be having our annual retreat where all of the Senate is invited in Charlottesville later this week, Thursday and Friday this week, where we're be looking at budget drivers. Certainly SOQ funding will have to be re-benchmarked in the budget, and there will be adjustments for Medicaid. Those two items right there are right now with the numbers we're looking at are going to amount to about $1.5 billion for the biennial budget. K-12 education, actually a little bit less than it has been sometimes in terms of re-benchmarking, but overall those are big numbers. There are other things out there that, of course, that are significant for us, notably our behavioral health. We're working on that now, and that's one of the areas where I think there are significant disparities in the ability to provide services statewide it's essential that we address that. We're focusing now on behavioral health with the Commission making recommendations this year, and it's thought that we won't be able to get too far. We last year passed legislation and funded it for same-day access, which that's a big deal. We didn't have enough money to put it out all over the state, but I'm hoping that we'll be able in this next budget be able to embed enough funding in the biennial budget so that we can have same-day access statewide. Then there are services that go along with that. That's a part of what we call the STEP program that we will need to fund. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to address those. Some of you are concerned, as was the federal government, about how we operate our training centers and provide services for individuals that have been in our training centers. Based on the court actions with the consent decree with the federal government and an oversight committee that we've had, we've embarked on a program to basically downsize and close all but one of our training centers. Already we have closed Petersburg, which was a significant undertaking. We closed Northern Virginia successfully, I believe. And actually, just within the last couple of weeks, we closed on the deal. It was a valuable piece of property up there. We sold the property where the training center was at for $30 million. So we'll have to figure out what we're going to do with those funds, but obviously those funds are supposed to be plowed back into the system. We've been downsizing in Hillsville at the Southwest Training Center and downsizing in Central Virginia in Madison outside of Lynchburg. We're still on a trajectory to close both of those facilities. Now, those of you that are impacted in those areas from an employment standpoint, the services they provide there have continued to question that. But we're still having a dialogue about it. The census numbers have been significantly downsized, but we will have to put additional dollars for community-based services in those communities to provide those services, which we think are the better services for individuals when they're capable of doing it, to live in the community with wraparound services. So we will continue to work on that. Big ticket items as far as capital related to mental health are we need a new facility in Richmond, our central. We've built new facilities in the western part of the state, the western state. We've built new facilities in Williamsburg, eastern state, which that facility goes back to 1769 originally, and now it's a museum. We've got new facilities there. But central state is going to be a very costly undertaking for us, but it's going to be very necessary that we begin the process for that facility there. So there are going to be some pressures on the budget. And for me, one of the things, I also work a lot in the area of the environment. I'm a big proponent and proud of our state park system. I like to find the extra money in the areas. And there's a lot of economic activity that can be generated from our parks. We have, I think, the best state park system in the nation. And on a per capita basis, we probably invest less in it than any other state in the nation. We added one park last year, Natural Bridge, which hasn't totally been absorbed into the system, but it's performing very well with what we have there now. We are putting monies into a facility in Stafford County, Water, which is very much needed in the Northern Virginia area. We have a couple of other possibilities for some land acquisitions, development of parks. One of the areas that we're looking at, and one reason we'll be mentioning it now, is perhaps looking at some state, local government partnerships and potentially private partnerships with that. The example I'll cite is in the Charlottesville, Albemarle area, where we acquired a piece of land there for development called Biscuit Run. And there has been some interest in that area from Charlottesville, Albemarle area of actually operating that, developing and operating it as a regional park. So I think that's a good concept for us if we can enter into an agreement with those localities perhaps to operate that park. One of the areas that I've been involved in that was asked to just expound on just a little bit this morning, and I'll try to be fairly brief here so we'll have lots of time for questions and for Delegate Ware to address the group. We set up a joint commission this past year dealing with local fiscal stress. Now, my aim initially wasn't to deal specifically with local fiscal stress, although that's a big part of it. I had offered a resolution to create a joint subcommittee, and the House this past year didn't pass any studies at all. So I was successful, though, as my responsibility as chair of the Finance Committee, to embed it in the budget. So we actually put the language that created the joint commission or joint committee in the budget with the intent of providing a forum for us to look in a broad way, not only at current fiscal stress with localities, but looking at disparities, looking at who pays for what between services that we all provide for our constituents what the state pays, what the local government pays, what taxing authorities the state has, what taxing authorities local government has. I know one of the goals for your group, and it's something that I actually have come to agree with you on, and I think we'll put it on the front burner, is trying to obtain some type of equal taxing authorities. Tobacco taxes. Tobacco tax is one of the issues that come to the forefront, but there are a lot of other things that we need to look at. For me, and I've worked on tax reform before, and I've got in trouble over tax reform before, we need to look at the big picture, and the overall goal, I think, should be to reduce the burden on local real estate tax, which you'll have to deal with on an annual basis. And that will involve, of course, the state perhaps picking up a larger percentage of share. And in my opinion, that's the only way we're going to address some of the disparities. It's like one of the goals in behavioral health is to have equal access to comparable services statewide, and with the CSBs and the funding formula that we have currently in place for how we pay for services through community service boards, we have a real problem there. Along the way, we'll probably have to put the composite index on the table again, and that's something that we tend to shy away from, but I know as a group, y'all are on record as wanting one adjustment, particularly for land use, where we figure land use in your ability to pay as opposed to market value. To me, that makes sense, but it's one of those things that we're going to have to address as we address a broad range of issues. So we created this, and it will take some time. We've begun our work. We've had a couple meetings and just to set the table for the issues. And a part of the work, though, and it was also the subject of some additional budget language we had. We put some language in the budget to address the specific fiscal stress, if you will, of one of the cities, Petersburg, and other localities that might be queuing up to be in a similar situation. So as a part of our work, we created a work group composed of people from the administration. Your group is participating in that, VACo and VML. The staff from our money committees in the General Assembly are participating in that. Rick Brown, who was here yesterday, is participating in that. The Auditor of Public Accounts is participating in that. And we're coming up, one of the first things that we came up with was an early warning system, if you will, or a model from the data that we gather from you to try to be able to understand and help in evaluating when there is potential for fiscal problems. For some of you, you may not like it yet, but I'm hoping that it will be refined to a model that's very workable, and we're very open to comments from VACo in terms of fine-tuning this. But I think even if you're a seasoned legislator at the local level, or if you're a new person with new responsibilities, it's helpful to have this kind of information so that you don't have to rely totally on staff. We all have to rely on staff to a certain extent, but it's good for you to have an understanding of your finances, and this type of model can be very helpful in that. So we've created that, and that was kind of a first step, and we've identified some localities that perhaps are on the bubble or perhaps should need some additional assistance. With that, I'll close my remarks so that we can have adequate time for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Hanger. Next, we have with us this morning Delegate Ware. Delegate Ware represents the 65th District. I was skimming through his bio here, and I noticed he was a history of government teacher at one time. One thing to teach and now to be out here and apply government. He also had the honor of being the first public school teacher to be on the State Board of Elections, State Board of Education, excuse me. He has served as 2 terms on Powhatan County and served as chairman. He is now chairman of the House Finance Committee, Commerce and Labor. He also chairs the Joint Subcommittee to evaluate tax preferences. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from the other side of the General Assembly, and let's give Delegate Ware a warm hand.
Thank you, Andy, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm inclined to say what he said. But But I've sat where you sat, as Andy alluded to. I did 2 terms on the Board of Supervisors in Powhatan County, my home county, and so I've been here to VACo as a supervisor. We sat in meetings that you are sitting through and listened to some of the folks, interested in some of the folks that are still presenting. Let me offer a few observations, and I'll begin, as my colleague Senator Hanger did, with the new political landscape. Obviously, we are, in January, we'll have a new governor, and in the House, we'll go from a 66-34 partisan division, 66 Republicans, 34 Democrats. Right now, we are at the margins 51-49 or 50-50. There are, I am told, counts will be, canvasses will be concluded today, and I understand there's some court proceedings already anticipated, but in any case, there will be dramatic changes in the makeup of the House. And I would offer one observation. As I looked across the bios of the new people coming in large numbers, most of them do not have local government experience. I urge you to be in touch with them over the next few weeks, because something as simple as the fact that your budget and our budget are codependent is something that they may not be intimately acquainted with. And knowing that we need to complete our work so that you all can complete your work is important. I urge you to be in touch with them and initiate and continue their understanding of how that works. I was a teacher in high school history and government for 32 years, so that was my principal professional experience. And as a teacher would, one thing I want to start by saying is Senator Hanger watches the whole landscape when it comes to the budget in the Senate Finance Committee, which considers both budget and tax proposals. In the House, we have it separated into 2 committees. The House Finance Committee, which I chair, looks at tax policy. The House Appropriations Committee, chaired by Chairman Jones from Suffolk, looks at the budget. And I will be leaving here to go to Portsmouth tonight for our 2-day session. We do meet together, House Appropriations and House Finance, to look at some of the things that Emmett has reviewed with you today. So I'm going to take up some of the questions that were posed to me from your folks, and I've made notes so that I stay on track, and you'll hit the buzzer if I go too long.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure. Well, let me say a couple things about what I see as we go into this, and maybe looking a little further down the road. One of the things that was asked is, do you expect any large-scale tax reform proposals in the near future in Virginia? I will say both of the gubernatorial candidates, including the winning candidate, have had something to say about tax reform. In fact, Governor-elect Northam says, and this is from his campaign website, he's committed to bringing together a tax reform commission that makes Virginia's tax code simpler, fairer, more progressive, and fiscally responsible. Certainly admirable goals, and it's in the, as they say so many times, the devil is in the details of those. There are a number of our sister states who have enacted major changes to their tax structures. Probably most of us are familiar with the fact that North Carolina has done so. The District of Columbia, Kansas, Indiana are among the other entities that have initiated significant changes. Some, like North Carolina, have eliminated most of their tax preferences and cut personal and corporate income taxes as a result of eliminating those tax preferences. Others, like the District of Columbia, broadened the sales tax to include certain services. Those are some of the things that have been done in our sister jurisdictions. As, again, Senator Hanger alluded to, there is a joint subcommittee that is evaluating tax preferences, and we've taken the chance to sort of step back. I took over the chairmanship of that study commission just earlier this year for the first time, and I've, as I will say shortly, taken a look at a couple of different options on that score. In terms of local taxing authority, there are some hardy perennials that have come before us. One of those is the cigarette taxing, local taxing authority. I would expect those bills to come forward, and this is a new era, and while in the past those bills have not been looked on favorably, we're in new territory. I would be surprised if there wasn't further consideration of those proposals, along with the new vapor cigarettes as well. Meals tax, last year we had a bill that was introduced to raise the maximum rate for county food and beverage tax from 4 to 8%. That was tabled. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see something along those lines renewed this time. One that we hear a lot about is the business professional occupational license, BPOL. What do we say? BPOL, right? The BPOL tax, we hear a lot about that. This local license tax has been targeted for revision a number of times. There have been several commissions, 01 and 03. In 2013, JLARC, our study agency, took a look at that and looked at some of the options in that score. But I know Senator Hanger and myself, having served in local government, we are completely against altering that until we can find adequate local funding sources to replace it. You just can't take something of that magnitude and not be able to replace those revenues. It doesn't add up. Machinery and tools, I would expect there will be considerable interest in that, although we have not made any significant changes recently. I do want to reflect on a couple of things on the budget, mostly in line with what you've heard, but maybe a couple different wrinkles. JLARC, again, has recently completed a study of Virginia's budget since 2008, and I want to highlight two things that they discovered since 2008. Since 2008, Virginia has grown at an average 2% in its budget revenues, its availability for general fund, 2% per annum. That's contrasted with years when we did 4%, 6%, approaching double digits. Within our memory, many of us, back in the 90s and the 80s and so on, into the early part of the 21st century. That's no longer the case. And in fact, when you look at all the revenue that has come into the Commonwealth since 2008, the whole thing, and you consider inflation and population growth, the total revenue growth for the Commonwealth of Virginia since 2008 is minus 1%. So we're facing and we're feeling very much what many of you are facing and feeling there, particularly those of you that are growing and all of us that are feeling the inflationary pressures, whether it's on health insurance or all those things that are part of what we experience. So those are sobering numbers, and those will be no doubt what we are all considering as we take a look at where we are. We have also had a letter of concern, I guess it's fair to say, from one of the bond rating agencies about where we are on our budget numbers. Chairman Jones of the House Appropriations Committee has identified clearly and unequivocally that our first priority will be to stanch our reserves and to make sure that we have a sufficient reserve to maintain our structurally balanced budget, and also the AAA bond rating that helps us so much on borrowing and on the costs of borrowing. So those certainly are important, and obviously education continues to be a very high priority. Public safety and all the things that go with that are very important. The Joint Subcommittee to evaluate tax preferences has sort of taken a new direction. In previous years, we considered sort of in series a variety of the tax preferences, and there are a lot of tax preferences. I've got a multi-page in small print listing of those tax preferences, and it's a lot. Someone has likened our tax code to Swiss cheese, and that probably is an analogy that has some purchase. In previous years, we've looked at those tax preferences, such as the historic rehab tax credit, one that Senator Hanger and I have had a keen interest in, land conservation tax credits, which have done so much to protect historic battlefields and other locations and farms across the Commonwealth. But at our most recent meeting, what I asked our committee to take a look at is not the individual preferences, but all of them collectively. and say, what does it mean that we have this level of tax preferences? It is in the billions of dollars annually on tax preferences. And when you think about that, we are doling those out to specific entities for, in many cases, admirable public policy goals. But they do a number of things, and one of the things that they do most significantly is they affect the rates. When you have those tax preferences, what does it mean? Everybody else has to pick up a little larger share. And so our rates reflect that. When you look at tax preferences, one of the things that all sort of Platonic folks that look at taxes, professors and such, look at is that a tax code ought to have certain features, certain principles, such as simplicity, transparency, neutrality, and stability. Tax preferences violate almost every one of those in some fashion, some in a greater degree than others. That said, I recognize that there are some that we're going to have to look at and consider because they have probably indispensable and politically overwhelming value and support, and we can't, I think, throw them all out. But I do think we need to look at them collectively, and I do think we need to reduce the number of tax preferences. That's my judgment, and in conversations with a number of my colleagues, I think that would be important for us going forward. It's obviously a discussion that's going to have buy-in from a lot of different people, but I think it can be helpful across the board, both in Richmond and where you are. One of the questions that was raised is how to capture services in taxation, which we don't do as much as we do production. Our economy, it reflects the modern realities that we no longer produce as much, fabricate as much, manufacture as much, both in Virginia and across the United States. We are a service-oriented economy. And the longer we put off reckoning with that, the more challenging it's going to be to deal with that reality and deal with a tax code that is equitable and fair in the real new economy. I think we've got to consider that. It is one that's going to have to take the work of a lot of people to get us there to that kind of equity and across the board fairness on that. The Marketplace Fairness Act, as some of you know, would authorize states to collect sales tax from remote retailers that don't have a physical presence in Virginia. In my judgment, that's a matter of simple equity. The operations that have a brick and mortar operation in Virginia are remitting sales and use tax. It's very inconsistent with the out-of-state retailers, and we're hopeful that Congress will eventually come to its way, and led by Senator Hanger, I would say, who was one of those at the forefront. We are situated so that if that were to come to pass, we have the structures in place to take advantage of that if Congress sees fit to move forward. And that's, as I said, the subject, been the product of work which Senator Hanger has been a real leader on. As I look forward to the session, the first thing that we have to do is continue to do what Virginia has done almost uniquely among our sister states, and that is have a responsible, balanced, structurally balanced budget, while at the same time providing for those essential needs that we have. The core ones, of course, are public education, public safety, and transportation. There are a host of others. Simply listing those three top ones does not scant many of the others, some of which have been alluded to today. Last year we were able, for example, to find money to fund a significant pay raise for state police, which was long overdue and which has only one source, and that is state government among our law enforcement agencies. We did at the same time find some funding to address pay compression for sheriff's deputies. I think we need to continue to work in that regard. Public safety nowadays is a more fraught workplace than it has been at least any time that I can remember. And so that's going to continue to be important. And I do think we need to maintain the appropriate reserves so that we are prepared for whatever may come down the road in the future. It's a pleasure for me to be back with you and to share this in this circumstance, and I look forward to responding to your questions. I'm not sure we'll have all the answers, but anyway, the dialogue that occurs in these kinds of forums. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Ware, and thank you, Senator Hanger. Well, at this time, we have time to, we wanted to have time to be able to take questions, because we know that there are many folks here that have some specific question about state government, about funding, because as both of our speakers has alluded to, we do have new people coming into the General Assembly. They do not understand how critical it is that the state get their budget so we can complete ours. So I think all of us need to think about any new legislators that are coming in, and we need to get out and talk with them, because they need to understand how critical timing is. At this time, I'd like to open it up for questions. If you need to, I'll go out with the microphone here and try not to get any feedback. If you would, just tell us what your question is.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear that building the reserves and therefore removing the economic negative outlook from our voters is in your mind. But how will that be accomplished? Will this be accomplished with a new revenue source, or will it be shrinking the pie which currently exists?
Actually, we've begun the process already. Last year, as we were putting the budget together, the adjustments for the biennial budget, we came up with the concept of creating an additional reserve fund in addition to our rainy day fund. And we allocated $35 million rather than spending all of the money that we had available to us after we cut, recognizing that we'd already cut. And then, after cutting, then we had additional revenues to allocate. We set aside $35 million at that point in time into a new reserve fund to help us with that. In addition to that, we authorized a moratorium. We authorized, what's our term when we don't find people? We're collecting some money from, I forgot the term. Amnesty, that's what it is, amnesty. We set up an amnesty program which just began in September, and we're anticipating a significant amount of money that will flow in under the amnesty program, and that money will also be put in the reserve program. We also, as remembering that we ratcheted back our budget, and then we ended June 30th of this past year with some additional dollars beyond what we were expecting after we ratcheted it back. We're directing those monies in addition to that. And in total, that could amount to about another $125 to $130 million. So that addresses that. We also had a very productive meeting with the bond rating agencies, all three of them, in Richmond back about a month and a half ago. And they were very pleased with the actions that we took. The one thing that we have little that we can do about right now that's still one of the negatives, and why I think Standard & Poor's is still has a negative outlook on us, is sequestration and the uncertainty in the federal government based on the fact that Virginia still, even though we're working on transitioning our economy, we're still very dependent on federal government expenditures.
Delegate Ware, anything to add to that?
I would just add to what Emmett has said. The good news that he indicated that our revenues are up modestly beyond what we anticipated so far. Obviously, with 70% of our revenue coming from withholding on the income tax, our big numbers come in April. So we will not know till then how well, but the overall, but so far the trend lines have been good in that regard.
Were the bonding agencies reasonably satisfied that 130 million plus another 30 million, that's roughly 150, 160 million? Are the bonding agencies happy with that amount, or is it not sufficient for them?
I would say they were pleased, or they expressed pleasure at what we were doing, but other than that, they're like poker players.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I don't do that. This is the second time that I've heard Senator Hanger speak about real estate taxes and
today. You filled in a little bit of the skeleton on there in it, but it sounds a whole lot like the discussion that we had back about 15 years ago on the personal property tax and PPTRA. Because there's different levels of taxation in different localities, there were all a local decision. The state then weighed in. Is that kind of the same premise that you're working at?
Not exactly, and you're bringing up something, a sore subject. I had the experience as local of being a commissioner of the revenue, and I was very much opposed to Jim Gilmore's plan, and that was one of the things I got in trouble over. But you know, we decided we had to cut it off at a certain point, and now it's a line item in our budget. We every year $950 million. We allocate back to local governments to offset. And there were winners and losers. If you had already made decisions where you were imposing a fairly heavy burden on personal property tax, then you captured that. No, the short answer is no. That's not where I want to go with this. What it has to do with, as long as the state, if we come to agreement about who pays for what and how we raise the money, and if we are, I guess, disciplined in our approach to budgeting so that we don't save money by cutting our support for local government services, SOQ funding, public safety, support for constitutional officers, the ranges of funding source that goes back to local government so that you're not in a box in having to allocate an undue amount for real estate. That's what I'm talking about. We accomplished that in part, I think, back, and I was there in 2003, 2004, I've been in the Senate now for 21 years, and I was a part of the tax reform commission that we had at that time. And the intent from my standpoint was not to be revenue neutral just at the state level, but to be revenue neutral when you looked at between state and local expenditures for the services we provide for our citizens. Because the truth of the matter is, you know, I was faulted at that point in time for being a part of the largest tax increase in Virginia's history. And the point that I continue to make and continue to make this day, that some years the largest tax increase in Virginia's history is collectively what you all have to do on real estate levies. And so we need to have the whole picture on the table. That's what I'm talking about.
Let me then throw out another topic here. I was just talking to relatives in Georgia, and they recently had a school bond referendum, and they dedicated a portion of sales tax to retire the debt. Would there be any appetite in the General Assembly to give localities the ability to raise our sales tax in our community, or to tap into our income tax and have a portion of that? Did you see how quickly that mic really noticed that?
I guess we call it a question. Obviously we're in new territory with the makeup of the chambers as they will be in January. Having said that, with the significant alteration in the sales tax related to transportation just a few years ago, I would think there would be some reluctance at altering how that formula operates. I've been proven wrong before, but I don't see the appetite for that today.
Well, again, it's a part of the reform that I'm hoping to accomplish. We'll look at those funding streams, and perhaps there are other revenue sources that we can allocate. I began this process several years ago when VACo EML came to an agreement on a plan for sharing income tax. And we jettisoned that along the way, but we continue to work on that. You're from Pulaski, I believe.
Right.
So you want us to take care of an issue you have. I know the voters in Pulaski County last week authorized a bond, I believe, a large bond, which is probably a good move. And
Voters decided.
Voters decided they wanted to do that, but you got to figure out a way to pay those bonds off. And I know a lot of y'all have that same quandary as we have a lot of infrastructure needs.
Okay, yes, sir.
Tom Shepard from York County. As part of the Hampton Roads arena, you know, and you talk about the transportation, I'll tell you flat, don't screw with that formula. We got well over $5 billion worth of projects in the book right now. And it's something important, I think, for the General Assembly to truly understand. Not too many years ago, the state and federal government paid for interstate commerce. I mean, not commerce, but for the roads. I mean, that's I-64s, tunnels, things like that. The 17 municipalities of Hampton Roads now are paying 65% of the tax load to build these things. Now think about it, that's all on us. So you take that 65% now building interstate roads for military, for transportation, port authority, things like all that kind of stuff. When you look at the cost of how we do business, and you talked about police compression. School compression is a huge problem, affecting a lot more of citizens of the state. And we're having trouble with hiring of educators. Where does that money come from? It comes from the local government. And our ability to raise the revenue, I mean, we're paying the other part. We need the transportation. There's a fix, and I'm glad we're able to do that. But for us to be able to raise the revenue, our only source, big source, is the real estate tax. I'll come back over that. So I don't understand why cities and counties have different tax structures in the sense that they do. It makes no sense to me. We have about, I think it's 4 counties, I could be off by 2, sorry if I am, but we have 17 jurisdictions down there. The rest of them are cities. They have the taxing authority to go after sources of revenue that takes the burden off the property owners, the homeowners. Counties do not. So I tell you, that is something that the state needs to step up, and I don't know what the resistance is, but you got to get off this. You got to give us the same authority as cities to be able to raise the revenue. Thank you.
I think we heard that message quite a bit yesterday in the Finance Committee. I did want to, as the Finance Committee made a report this morning, I was very pleased that yesterday in the meeting, we saw Fairfax County come into play and say that they had taxing disparities between their towns and their county, and it was a burden to them. And I thought, glory hallelujah, Fairfax has a problem, we're going to get something fixed now.
Your question and comments in 2 parts. The one I think which Chairman Harry expounded on, I want to address. I think we're going to try to get there. I agree with you. On the transportation funding, you did not mess with formulas. Yes and no. First, Hampton Roads, Northern Virginia, when we addressed transportation in 2013, we basically fixed funding sources in those areas because we allow authorities to impose additional taxes in those 2 areas. The rest of rural Virginia didn't get anything out of the deal. We're hurting. We've got major needs on Interstate 81, well, you name it. Prospect 220, Prospective Interstate 73, some portions of 64, all of 66, which we need to address and don't have the resources to address them. So that is an issue that will have to be on the table in terms of how we go about finding the additional revenue that's necessary to support the infrastructure in rural Virginia.
You know, it's challenging to get together the kind of consensus and the sufficient coalition to make that kind of large-scale change that you've described and which is needed, because obviously today counties are doing things that cities before this did solely, and you all have obligations, duties, costs, burdens that you handle that were once not the province of counties, which were much more rural. That's part of the change that we're facing, just as I alluded to earlier about taxation of services. To construct that kind of a political coalition across the Commonwealth is an enormous undertaking, and obviously it's one that benefits if you have the one person who is elected across the Commonwealth willing to work on. So certainly Governor-elect Northam will be an indispensable part if we are able to move forward with something along those lines. I will tell you candidly, in the chamber that I have been in, it's been one where there's been a real reluctance to make those kinds of changes because of the implications, political implications. And I wouldn't underestimate the difficulty going forward. Having said that, we are going to see some very significant changes in the makeup of the House, and I'm hopeful that we can begin to recognize the very real and modern challenges that you all face.
One comment I will make, I've never understood, Pulaski County, Wood County, a number of other, Montgomery County, we all cooperated to try to start on the tobacco tax a number of years ago. And I never quite can understand the reluctance of the General Assembly to enable the localities to enact a tax. You're not raising the tax, we're raising the tax, we're taking the heat. You're just opening the door for us. So I never have understood the General Assembly's reluctance to, you're not raising the taxes, we are. I promise.
That's not how their opponents are
And I'll just say amen to that. Thank you. And I'm going to continue the same subject, just a different little vein. Thank you, gentlemen, both for coming. Senator Hanger, thank you for that map. So you can tell, looking at that map, 53% of the state income tax comes from my region. I'm from Arlington, Virginia. And we're kind of an economic engine, and what drives our economic engine in many ways is Metro. We need help funding Metro. We've got to have a dedicated stream of revenue. We cannot do it on our real estate taxes. We just can't. And again, it's the same thing. Give us permission, give us the tools to even just tax ourselves some more. I don't understand the reluctance, because if you make us stall out on transportation and Metro, everything starts to stall and the whole state goes down, because you all depend on us. And we depend on you, and I think we need to work together on transportation around the state. I think that's what this group does. Thank you for your comments. We need help from the legislature to just do the work we need to do. Thank you.
I think that was a comment. I didn't see a question in there. Delegate Ware?
Well, we like comments too, though.
Andy, to your point about us simply enabling, I think probably our electorate in the House districts would not see it as simply opening the door for you. They would see it as us actually being co-partners in that tax increase. And that's where there is a reluctance on a lot of my colleagues' part to go forward, because they are seen as the tax increase. If you want to look at the bottom line. And I think to the extent that you can be in touch with your legislators and let them know of your support for these things, be it cigarette tax, be it related to Metro, it is dependent very significantly on the rank and file of our bodies to have that kind of support to go forward, if indeed there is that. But, it may be a distinction without a difference to say that you'd be raising it and we wouldn't.
Thank you, Delegate Ware. I think you just gave us a perspective that we did not understand. I've never heard it explained that way, that they feel they will be viewed as the tax raisers and not we, the folks that would tax ourselves. Other questions? I'm over on this side of the room now, so it's a good time for a question over here.
Really just a comment. You wouldn't be, if it's not allowed, then you would be raising our county real estate tax. That's the effect of not having that tax authority. I'm from Rockingham County. One of our concerns is this continued discussion about machinery and tools tax. We're number 3 on that list. I think our revenue is about $8.5 million a year. In Rockingham County, we've got a lot of industries. Names we all recognize: Miller Coors, Merck Pharmaceutical, White Wave, Daniel Foods, all have expanded. It's because, in part, our Board of Supervisors has incentivized those expansions by giving some of that money back to them. So I don't know if that's something that the state is aware of, but that's where the state is giving the authority to the county to be able to offer that incentive. And maybe other localities aren't aware of those opportunities. So maybe if more discussion or more awareness, then this machinery and tools tax issue wouldn't be as big a deal. It hasn't affected Rockingham County from an expansion standpoint. No question.
Do you put a time limit on your incentive? So if you give an incentive to Miller Coors, does it run 10, 15 years?
It's a 5-year payback, so Miller Coors has to invest a certain amount of, $50 million is the number for Miller Coors, Merck, White Wave, and then they have to employ a certain number of individuals, additional employees, and it's usually a 5-year.
So you have a form of performance agreement. If they don't live up to what they've committed to, they don't get the full. I mean, that's a good example. We use the same thing. It's a good example of us being a good steward of the authority we do have.
So you tackle that?
The
Machinery and tools.
generally, of course, Rockingham County is one of my counties that I have, so I'm generally supportive of the county administrator there. Actually, the point he raises is valid, and I've been made aware of that, and so the position I've taken in the past is, you know, that it is a significant part of the revenue flow for localities, and when you're doing deals, economic development deals that take that into consideration, and the enterprise comes to the table, you know, that's fair. You know, it's like in the VACo, there are some adjustments we can make to it, but I've been somewhat protective of both VACo and machinery and tools.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions?
A fair amount of work was done with VRS a number of years ago, creating a hybrid system. There also, as part of that, is the life insurance plan. In Roanoke County, we are paying better than $2 million a year, I think. I think it's 1.31% of our payroll on life insurance. Is there any thought at the General Assembly of allowing that to be a local option so that we might self-fund what we feel is important and otherwise restructure that benefit for our best use for our employees?
Thank you, Joe.
No, but now that you've mentioned it, I think it's something certainly could be discussed. I don't see any just from my knowledge, I don't see any reason why we couldn't discuss that potential change. In the area of VRS, I just didn't make comments in the opening remarks, but no questions have come forward yet. But other than this, one of the things we've done to basically help us moving forward is not put things, as one of my colleagues used to say, put the bills in the drawer and defer them till later. We've been trying to keep up with things. And VRS is something where we have a solid commitment now not to use that as a piggy bank. And so we've made changes, but we've also made commitments for funding, which we've executed over the last couple of years, which now actually are beginning to pay dividends for us, because as you'll see from the growth in the fund this past year and from our discipline that was self-imposed over the last couple of years, the actuarial rates are causing us to have to pay less over this next biennial budget. So that's a savings for all these local governments and the state government to do that. But I'll make note of that, and I'll ask somebody that knows a whole lot more about it than I do to see if that's a possibility.
Thank you. I just wanted to backtrack on the observations over here on my right. One of the things that we have instituted in the House in recent years is a requirement for any tax credit that had come back before us on a 5-year cycle to be reviewed and to see if it's been effective in doing what it's supposed to do in terms of job creation or economic development or other laudable public purpose. And I think that kind of having an endpoint or a timeline gives a sense of obligation, a sense of making sure that it's doing what we intend for it to do.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
This is not so much of a question as it is a statement. Having sat through the microaggression aspect down there this morning, all I've been hearing, I sat next door and here all I've been hearing is revenues, revenues, taxes, revenues, taxes, taxes. We need to look at cuts as well. I'm sorry I'm not hearing anything. You know, maybe it's an ugly word. You know, I don't want to keep paying tea, drinking tea and paying taxes to England. Medicaid, Medicare, the escalation rate compared to the state budget, CSA, localities need more options, but we need to rein in spending too. I'm appalled that no one is saying, with the current administration and looking ahead to the future, let's rein this in, because we're all on this bus that's going over the cliff, and I don't like it.
I did detect a question in there about Medicaid and CSA, so those have been a budget driver.
Well, actually, that's a comment that begs a response too, because there actually I think that the General Assembly has been conservative in its budgeting, and I know most of the local governments have been conservative in the budgeting as well. We haven't been talking about it this morning because there are budget drivers out there, that some of which we can't control right at the moment, although we've taken steps to control costs. And we can do some things to efficiencies. We have, I mentioned the state parks before. We're operating the state parks on a very modest budget because we get people that like the parks to help us manage those parks. In a lot of areas, we get people to support us. So we have to look at the market for teachers. You all at the local level, you have to do that. You don't overly repay your teachers just because you feel good about it and want to do it. It's what the market dictates. So, I've been a conservative Republican, but there are certain core issues that you have to address. Medicaid, specifically, I've been a proponent, as long as the Federal Affordable Care Act is in place, of us obtaining a waiver to use the benefit primarily for behavioral health, mental health services, substance abuse services, to spend that money in Virginia. Virginia taxpayers that are at higher income levels, 250,000 above the single, combined about 500,000, are already paying collectively throughout the Commonwealth over $1 billion a year to the federal government to support the Affordable Care Act through the 3.8% add-on. So during this coming session, I think we're going to have a conversation about whether or not, if Congress does not replace the Affordable Care Act with something that's reasonable and that it's still there and Virginia taxpayers are still being taxed, that we would address that. The misconception about Medicaid, and there is a misconception about Medicaid that it's just a program for people that should have done better for themselves. It's their bad judgment and circumstance that causes them to have to drain on the taxpayer's dollar. Not so. About 80% of our Medicaid dollars are spent on nursing homes and residential placements for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's where 80% of it goes. The 20% of it is out there, which is complemented by the safety net, saves people's lives, quite frankly. And so not that we can't be more efficient with it, but we're going to work on that. The CSA, very valid point that you're raising. We put in place some cost-saving methods several years ago that reduced our expenditures in the Children's Services Act, now as it's known, by a couple $100 million over a 2-year budget. Now what we're seeing is due to the necessary treatments for children, specifically with autism and other educational issues, that we're finding that private day placements now are increasing significantly and are a huge strain on the state and local government budget. We put a committee in place to address that. I was disappointed because it didn't get as far along as I hoped it would, because we had an $80 million hit just last year on our state budget. And I was hoping we were going to figure out a way to curtail that. They're not there yet. We're going to continue to study, but we've got to address it. So there will be cost-saving measures that we try to implement as a part of that. So I appreciate your thoughts on that.
I guess it's one of the liabilities of hanging around for a while, but I can remember back when the Comprehensive Services Act was enacted, and the purpose was to simplify and bring together in a holistic way services for kids who were needy. And the idea was, by doing it in that fashion, we look at them rather than across a number of agencies in one sort of centralized depot, as it were, and presumably see some budgetary benefit from that. Well, the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray, and it is one of the huge challenges that many localities face. On Medicaid expansion, or let me start with Medicaid, it has gone from 9% of the state budget, as we currently have it, before expansion, 9% to somewhere on the order of 22 or 23% of our general fund revenues. That is not a sustainable path going forward. And that leads me to my next point, which is one of those rare instances where my colleague and I probably look at it a little differently. I have not supported Medicaid expansion, and I don't foresee myself being able to support it going forward. And the thing that you pointed to is one that I think we've got to think about. I've got kids and grandkids. We can't borrow into eternity and continue to be prosperous and successful as a political entity. And there's going to come a time. I harken back to one of the old presidential economic advisors from some years back who had a basic economic theorem: if something cannot go on, it will not go on. And I don't know when it'll happen, but when you look at the indebtedness of the United States and some of our sister states, I don't think that is sustainable into the long-term future, regardless of what may be resolved in Washington or not resolved in Washington. I don't think that creating a substantial new entitlement at this point in that fashion is the way that we ought to go.
Just to build on that a little bit, in the financial presentation we had earlier, which in Reginball, if Medicaid without expansion continues on its present track, by 2026, we will spend more on Medicaid than we spend on K-12. That is a real problem. That's a real problem. And one of the factors that we heard was that every year the projection cost increase of Medicaid is being projected at 2-3%, and it comes back in at 7% by the time the numbers are in, and you guys really have to dip into the budget to balance that at the end. We would call that a caboose bill. That's really tough. That is really tough. Have time for maybe one more question. Yes, ma'am.
Not a question, but I just want to publicly say to both Senator Hanger and Delegate Ware, I know personally that they have both very quietly and very effectively helped protect both depot revenues and machinery and tools revenues for local governments, and they have had a lot of people try to convince them otherwise. They have held fast and protected those for local revenues. So publicly want to thank you both.
You bring a good point out, because a lot of times we ourselves as elected officials never get complimented very much. These guys have gone to bat for us, and we want to thank you. That just about wraps up our time. I want to thank all of you for attending here today. This presentation will be available on video a little bit later online. If you would, please take a moment and sign the form in back that says how relevant you thought this was. We very much appreciate these two gentlemen taking time out of their busy schedule to come here and give us the advice, give us their thoughts. I hope we didn't beat you up too bad, but you see the level of frustration we have, and both of you as local legislators understand that. Any closing comments, Senator?
I just thank y'all for the opportunity of having the dialogue and for your candid comments. Thank you.
I would say the same. This is a wonderful, constructive gathering, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to continuing that conversation. I see several colleagues that represent areas that I do, and it's great to see. I look forward to continuing that. And for those of you that I don't directly represent, I'm certainly interested and appreciate very much both the intensity and the particularity of the concerns that you bring to us. There are times I walk away from here, and this will be no exception, with things that I did not know, despite the number of years that I've spent down there, because you know it and you experience it in the most immediate and pressing way. So thank you very much for this terrific forum.
Thank you all for attending. This concludes our forum.